us from time to time in the relationships that we're in, our significant relationships. When that happens, typically you're caught in the cycle of dysfunction. And in this episode, you'll learn what that is exactly and how to get unstuck. So let's go ahead and we'll talk more about that. Hello, Karen. How are you doing today?
Oh, pretty good. How about you?
Good. My partner in crime. So that's good. Hey, here's something that I have found, and I was thinking about this earlier, is that I think that probably every couple I've ever counseled in crisis, so a couple in crisis, were stuck in what I call the cycle of dysfunction. What do you think about that? Do you think that is true,
Yeah,
or do we need to kind of expand a little bit more on what that's all about?
well, I think we should expand about what that's all about.
Yeah,
And I think it's true.
yeah, you know, and so
Yeah.
and I'm amazed that it's almost like we come into our relationships ill-equipped to manage them in a healthy way.
Yeah.
It seems like that's almost always the case, you know.
Yeah. I think
So,
that our school systems and everything, we do a lot to teach people history and math and science,
hmm
but we could really use courses on how to handle relationships and conflict management and things like that.
if
And
that
then
were the
just
case, I'd be out of business.
yeah,
So,
maybe
well,
that wouldn't be a bad thing.
yeah, maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing, but it's not just our schools. I think every parent needs to learn this stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
and that every kid that I've ever watched, including my own, that
Mhm.
that we all seem to not be able to or navigate conflict in a healthy way. You
Yeah.
know, so okay. Well, let's just go ahead and we'll just jump in and see what we can learn about this. So, this is all based on a course that I created a few years ago, and we want to talk about this whole concept of the cycle of dysfunction. And the name of the course is Sideways Relationships, and I'll be mentioning as we go along in our Beyond Betrayal group how to get access to that resource. But for now, I just want to share this particular content with you folks. I have a roadmap. After thinking about relationships for a long time, I've developed a roadmap on relationships, and I believe that the number one worst goal that any couple can have in a relationship is seeking to be happy. I, I, I know that sounds counterintuitive, but
Mhm.
but when we make happiness our goal in our relationships, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, you can't be happy all the time. There's situations in life that are going to come up that are not pleasant,
Yeah.
and you can't just sing a little happy song and get through them.
Yeah. Furthermore, and I said this once when I was preaching a message on this topic, and I said that your happiness is not my problem. And that set off a tinder keg of all sorts of kind of pushback, but it really isn't. And furthermore, and that so that my happiness is not external to me. So, of course, happiness is based on the word happens, and it's the root is the idea of our circumstances. But when we make our happiness the job of the other person, that their job is to make me happy, well, then we are setting ourselves up for failure every time, because people are always going to disappoint us, no matter how good of a person that they might be.
And there's some people that will just never be happy.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So I think that instead of making happiness the goal in a relationship, seeking to make your relationships about relational health. And that's something that's always within your control. Now, that doesn't mean that your partner or your spouse is going to be pursuing that goal. But I was telling one of my clients the other day is that I believe that it's possible to have a healthy relationship with anyone, because health in the relationship is really up to me. And even if you are totally dysfunctional, I can still respond to a totally dysfunctional person in a healthy way. Yeah. So now, over time, we'll unpack this little roadmap, a little bit more in detail. But for now, that's all the further I'm going to go on that. But one thing that we know is that everybody starts at the same place in a relationship. I've officiated many, many weddings, and everybody starts at the same place. But then what happens is that some disappointment occurs in the relationship. And as a result of that people get stuck in the cycle of dysfunction. I want to make sure I just turn my phone off. I didn't do that earlier. And I don't want anybody to give me a call while I'm in the middle of a live stream. So when some disappointment occurs, then couples get stuck in the cycle of dysfunction. Now, I think I have a little video here that I created a few years back, and let's just see if that's up next. Yes, it is. And so let's go ahead and we'll watch that video at this.
If you're a parent, you've probably heard something like this before. Mom, he hit me. Yeah, but he started it. That's how kids do conflict. So you take the kids, sit them down, and give them the old lecture of how two wrongs don't make a right. And if they don't straighten up, you'll give them something to cry about. Sure, that works for the moment, but the lesson never sinks in. It's like water on a duck's back. And it isn't long before they're right back at it, using their same old, ineffective ways of handling conflict. This isn't about kids, but kids grow up and get married, and sometimes they don't outgrow what they learned about handling conflict. When we get hurt, we hurt our partner right back. Sometimes by what we do, other times by what we say. We feel justified because they started it. It's time to learn better ways of resolving conflict than this cycle of dysfunction. This cycle of dysfunction is a good way to get nowhere in resolving problems in your relationship. All it does is keep you spinning your wheels, and who wants that? This cycle of dysfunction has two parts, theirs and yours. They bring something to the cycle, but so do you. Both parts keep the cycle going. They bring the hurt or offense, and you bring the reaction. Your reaction triggers theirs, and things go round and round. Nothing ever really gets resolved. Now, it would be nice if your partner always took the initiative to make things right whenever they've hurt you, but things usually don't work that way. However, you don't have to stay stuck. You can end the cycle of dysfunction from your side of the relationship when you replace your dysfunctional reaction with a healthy response. This doesn't mean that you just overlook what they've done. That wouldn't be healthy. It means that you learn how to respond to what they've done, rather than reacting to it. Reactivity can be tricky to detect. It's easy to spot when it comes in the form of yelling, threatening, pouting, or some other obviously unhealthy behavior. But other types of reactivity are subtler, but just as unhealthy. Making allowances for your partner's irresponsibility, peacekeeping, and avoiding conflict can be just as dysfunctional as the more obvious forms of reactivity. Whenever your reaction allows your partner to continue to do the things that are harming your relationship, hurting your well-being, or ruining his or her life, then you're enabling problems, not resolving them. So, to end the cycle of dysfunction, you must pay attention to how you're responding to the hurt that your partner has caused. Find healthy ways to express, process, and resolve the problems in your relationship, and you'll end the cycle of dysfunction by solving for X. We'll talk more about that in our next lesson. You'll benefit from learning about how to solve for X. So keep working through the program and stay on track.
Some initial thoughts.
Whew! It's hard not to get stuck in some cycles.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I would say I'm probably like on the passive side of things, but I was thinking there's a lot of things in here that I'm doing that aren't aggressive, but they aren't helpful.
Yeah, and so that's probably I call that kind of the agreeable dysfunction,
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
well, let's go ahead and we will see how this all works. I would just want to recap some of this and maybe elaborate a little bit more on it. Is that the whole idea of the cycle of dysfunction is that it has two parts, and the A part is theirs. And so that's actually what you don't have any control over. And that's actually what everybody exerts. I mean, they expend all of their effort trying to gain control of that. But the X part is yours, and that's really where your power is. And so when you learn how to solve for X, you can see positive change in your relationship.
Can I say something about
Of
that
course.
real quick?
Yeah.
So years ago, when my kids were little, I was trying to get one of my kids to do something, and they just were not doing it. And God really laid it on my heart that we're called to love others and have self-control, not the other way around. We're not called to control others and have love for ourselves.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So your kids probably have a good mom then. So, at least that would be my evaluation of it. So
Well, work in progress.
there you go. So the cycle of dysfunction has two parts, and what happens is that they bring the offense into the relationship, and they do that by something that they said or didn't say. And, they run a whole gamut, and I'm not going to go into all of that. But sometimes it's things that are, typically are aggressive, or it even could be things that are neglectful. And, but sometimes it's something they did or didn't do. And here again, it runs the whole gamut. But so the offense, hurt, or disappointment is what ignites the cycle of dysfunction. And so that's what begins the whole thing. However, once it's ignited, that it finds its fuel by your reaction. And so, and when they bring the offense into the relationship by something they said or did that hurts, and that's dysfunctional. We recognize that. But then you bring the reaction to what they said, And I'm really drawing a fine line between reaction and response,
Yeah.
because it's always appropriate to respond to wrongdoing, but it's never appropriate to react to wrongdoing, because when you react, that's what traps you in that cycle of dysfunction. There's a passage of scripture in the book of Romans chapter 12, I think it's verse number 21. It says, "Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good." And we'll better understand what that looks like in a little bit as we go through the balance of this presentation. So,
Like a response is automatic or instinctual,
yeah,
versus a reaction is no, wait, so other way around. A reaction is automatic or instinctual, and a response is something that you invest thought into.
yeah, and reactions are it seems to me like they're almost always dysfunctional, and so you can invest thought and still come up with a stupid strategy, and so that can be dysfunctional, but learning how to respond in healthy ways makes all the difference. So, and then when we are talking about this roadmap to winning relationships, what happens is when somebody brings a disappointment into the relationship, couples get stuck in blaming. And I want to be clear about this, is that, yes, it's true that probably someone, probably the offending person is at fault. But as long as you're trying to assess fault, that you're not going to resolve the issue. And so, and you can just go ahead and assess the fault, but you don't have to get stuck in blame. And that's really where couples just fall into this rut. I've seen it. I've seen it so many times, and it's very hard to get out of that, because negative habit patterns are really hard to break. I was talking with one of my clients the other day, and he was telling me about, that this is really hard for him to do, some of the things I'm coaching him on. And I said, well, that's true. You've had 20 plus years in this relationship, practicing how to do it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so obviously it's not going to feel right.
It's hard to pull the weeds. It's hard to pull the weeds out, and then it takes a while for good plants to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but reaction includes negative communication patterns, and I'm going to go so much more deeply into that in actually a webinar that I have coming up. But and then it also includes getting stuck, perpetuating this cycle of dysfunction. So there's actually two faces of reaction, and we can always see, it's easy to detect one of these faces, and that's of course the aggressive face. And aggression manifests itself in plenty of ways. Yelling is aggressive. Threatening is aggressive, and name calling is aggressive, even if it's not necessarily a bad name. One of the things that I've learned a long time ago in my relationship with my wife is that no good is ever served by saying, "You're just like your mother." And she would always boomerang that back on me. Well, you're just like your father, you know. So, and there's all sorts of kind of other forms of reaction. I've been another one of my clients that she told me about when she was hurt by her spouse, that about something that she threw at him. And I'm telling you right now, people can get really creative when they start throwing stuff around. Now I'm going to respect her confidentiality, and I'm not going to even mention what she threw. But all I'm going to say is that people can get really creative when they start chucking stuff at each other. One of the most dramatic fights that I ever... Huh?
That's not a good place to be.
No. When I was growing up, one of the most dramatic fights I remember as a kid was when my mom and my dad was at one end of the kitchen, and my mom was all the way kind of in another room, and they were throwing Pepsi bottles at each other. So, yeah, I mean, it could have killed each other, or at least, or maybe if one of the kids got in the line of fire, we could have been seriously injured. But
were they full or empty?
No, they were empty. But trust me, that they were throwing those with pretty good force, and there was a lot of name calling going on too. So, but here's where it gets tricky, because anybody can see that that's dysfunctional, but it's hard for us to see that when I'm pleasant and my spouse is has done something to hurt me, and I'm pleasant, that can be equally dysfunctional. I call it the dysfunction of agreeability. We have the dysfunction of aggression, but we also have the dysfunction of agreeability. Now, one of the things that oftentimes is that we are making allowances or excuses, for our partner. Is that my mom, here again, and people say don't speak ill of the dead, but but it's our family of origin that oftentimes gives us the best lessons or illustrations with respect to relationships. But my mom was a master at making excuses for my dad's bad behavior. She was. She was always. My dad was a diabetic, and everything. Every character flaw that he had was, he's a diabetic. So it's like a get out of jail free card. So peacekeeping, and here again we'll spend another lesson on this type of stuff. But peacekeeping is different than peacemaking. Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." So when you find a way to bring healthy peace into your relationship, you're blessed by doing that. But when you're just about and you see this, by the way, in alcoholic families a lot. Is that don't do anything to upset your dad, is that, and so it's really not about peacemaking. It's about peacekeeping. And then another agreeable dysfunction is avoiding conflict. And I've found myself too often in that space where, avoiding, actually conflict, if you look at it like a warning light on your dashboard, it is an indicator that something needs attention.
Yeah.
And there's a way to do that well. And so, and we just will not have time to go into all of that today. But we will talk about it actually in this upcoming webinar that I mentioned. So the real key to all of this, and I'm giving you the secret here. Oh, we got Matt Johnson who's watching us, and he says people will fight to keep the peace, but it's super difficult to make peace. You have to be intentional. That's a good observation, Matt. I appreciate that. And I hope you're feeling better soon.
Me too.
You know that when it comes to ending the cycle of dysfunction, this is gold. This is worth the price of admission, and it didn't cost you anything to watch this broadcast. But everything changes when I change. That is the secret to ending the cycle of dysfunction. Everything changes. Like I said, is that it's possible to have a healthy relationship with a completely unhealthy person. You know, you may have to put them in timeout, or in some cases you may have to put them in prison. But it's still possible to have a healthy relationship even with an unhealthy person when you change. You know.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a million stories, but I know that I gotta respect my time, but I have a million stories I could tell about that. So this does not mean, let me tell you what it does not mean. It does not mean redoubling codependent efforts. That's not what it means. Just trying really hard or to be the spouse or the wifey or the hubby that they want you to be. That's not how that works.
Yeah.
Trying to exert more control. And that's kind of the opposite of that. You know, that a lot of couples or a lot of people will end up trying to be more of what they want me to be. And when that isn't working, then the spouse, the disappointed spouse, will try to exert more and more control. And here again, and people get confused about that, particularly when they're with respect to that and setting healthy boundaries, because really a boundary is about self-control. It's not about other control. And here again, that's another topic for another day. You know, what we're talking about today is worth learning in and of itself, but then it spins out into so many other areas that are also worth exploring, and we're going to try to do that as much as we can. Yeah. So it's not about exerting more control, and it's also not about using threats or manipulation. Well, we can always get a divorce, you know, or that, you know, or and there's a million and one other types of threats that couples will use, or resorting to other unhealthy practices. So that's not what solving for X is. Well, if that's not what it is, well, then let's think about what it might be. Is that really, okay, here's kind of a good headspace to be. Is that if you want to be dysfunctional, I'm going to give you the freedom to do that. Because after all, if you stop and think about that, that's exactly how God treats us.
Yeah.
You know, he says, well, if you want to go your own path, I'm going to give you the freedom to do that. But I'm not going to let that path work for you. and that's actually love.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
like, and you know, in scripture, one of my favorite words is if, because it's almost always like, if you do this, then this will happen. If you do this, then that will happen, you know, and God lets us choose. And a lot of times he lays out what's going to happen before it even happens. And people choose the one that's not good. Like, I warned you, this is what was going to happen. But
yeah, it's kind of like back in the day of Let's Make a Deal on that old television show. You can have what's behind door number 1 or door number 2 or door number 3. Hey, guess what? Here's what God says. Let me show you what's behind all of them. You know. And we still we still end up making stupid decisions in our life. So here's the idea, is that that when you solve for X, you give your partner the space to be dysfunctional. But then you say, I'm going to make it my project to be the champion for health in this relationship. That's my job. I only have one job, and that's to be the champion for health in the relationship. Remember, everything changes when I change. And this does mean that I need to show up and speak up. When something hurts me, I need to bring that into the light of the relationship, and I need to learn how to speak up about that. And here again, I'm going to be training folks on how to do that. But I also need to be practicing effective conflict resolution. One of the ways that you can, it's always a good litmus test. If you want to know if your conflict resolution skills are not effective, is that it does, then all you have to do is that, are they working to resolve the problem? And when they are dysfunctional, what they do is that they only deepen the problem and the divide in the relationship. You know, so and so it does mean communicating effectively, and it also means practicing healthy self and relationship care. And so this is some of what solving for X does. Think about it, because this is the way you reclaim your power in the relationship. When you feel that your relationship is not going in the right direction, well, when you change, not by redoubling codependent efforts or trying to exert more control or blah, 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 but when you begin to show up and speak up and seek to resolve conflict in healthy ways and communicate well and things of that nature and practice healthy self-care, well, then things will change. They always do. They will change. And so the real goal is to end the cycle of dysfunction. And when you do that, you reclaim your power to make real progress. I have one more slide I want to jump to in just a minute, but Karen, anything else you'd like to say about this before we wrap this up?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, well, that's fine. So, I'm glad I've answered all of your questions. So actually, is that we will probably unearth a lot more in some of these subsequent sessions that we do. But in the meantime, I want to point people to our conflict management webinar coming up, and that I'm calling it Driver's Training, and smoothly travel the freeways of conflict without getting into fender benders or even major crashes. And the webinar is free, and so even if you cannot attend the live session, you can get access to the replays for free, but you have to register. Now, I did not put the link in the show notes on our various platforms, but I will go back through and put that link in the comments so that people can find that online and register. I'm really excited about this webinar. You and I have been kind of trying to get all the tech stuff working for that. And I think that we are there.
Yeah.
Last run went well.
Yeah. And so I'm going to try a couple more test runs, but then we will go ahead and do that. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up for today. Thank you, Karen, as always, for joining me, because my broadcasts are always better with you in them.
Thanks.
They really are. So, all right. So that's it for today. You can find the way forward. You can go over to beyondbetrayal.org and that will give you information about our Beyond Betrayal program. But really, what I would encourage you to do is to join our private Facebook group. And you can find that on Facebook at beyondbetrayal.org. And we supply that group with all sorts of content, all sorts of types of content. And we really we have some really exciting things coming up with respect to that. So that's it for now. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time.